when you speak the language of a country, you have a different understanding of the country, of the people, of the culture. You get closer to it.
Why do you think are the reasons why it's so difficult for English speakers to learn Japanese or Japanese speakers to learn English? 所以我大学的时候去北京大学学1年，那在北京大学。皆さんこんにちは and welcome to Let's Ask Shogo. Today I actually have a very special guest on this video. Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome Steve. Thank you so much for this occasion today. This is a great honor. I've seen so many of your videos in the past. Of course, you've probably did a lot of collaboration videos with a lot of Japanese people too, haven't you in the past?
I have.
Yes, I've seen you speaking so many languages and such, and I've just been so inspired by your videos and your work. So
very kind of you.
This is an amazing occasion. Thank you so much. Would it be okay if you could give us a short self-introduction to my viewers? I'm pretty sure most people know about you already.
Well, I'm 76-year-old grandpa. I live here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Most of my career I was in the wood business. But I do enjoy languages. I did learn some languages while working for a variety of reasons. And for the last 15 years or so, I've spent a lot of time at learning languages and have developed a website for language learning with my son, Mark. And of course, I have a YouTube channel called Linguist Steve. So that's been kind of my third career, let's say. I used to work for the Canadian government. I was in Hong Kong. My first assignment was to go there and learn Chinese. And then in 1971, my family, we moved to Tokyo. I worked in the embassy there. And of course, I learned Japanese in Japan, which is easier than doing it at home.
いや本当に違う動画で日本語を話されているところも何度も拝見してるんですけれども、もう日本人の方よりも上手ですよね、日本語が。
いやとんでもないですね。
本当に。やはりスティーブさんの素晴らしいところは、話すそこの人たちの雰囲気をもうまとっていらっしゃるなっていうふうに思うので、それが本当にすごいなっていうふうに。僕実は大学時代に中国に留学しておりまして、
はい。
所以我大学的时候去北京大学学1年，在北京大学，所以我知道那个怎么说学语言的是很难的事情，所以
是，费很多时间的。
对，我真的羡慕你。
对了。
谢谢。Thank you so much. And by the way, I actually used to live in the U.S. I'm fully Japanese, but I grew up in Michigan for 6 years. So I was very lucky to, basically I didn't learn it, I just grew up in the environment. So.
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure whether you were American or Japanese.
I'm 100% Japanese.
I thought you were American, but
thank you.
Launched into Japanese, and then I thought, that's pretty authentic, so.
Thank you so much. Then I would love to jump into today's main topic right away. So Steve, recently I've made a video talking about Japanese people are not very good at English, and one of the reasons is because the combinations for English speakers trying to learn Japanese and vice versa are one of the most difficult language combinations. There's some studies that are done about that. I think it was a US department that sent out these results saying that it takes more than 2,200 hours to get to business proficiency. Why do you think are the reasons why it's so difficult for English speakers to learn Japanese or Japanese speakers to learn English?
Okay, I haven't read these studies, so I don't know what their reasoning was, what the methodology was. But I think that the difficulty of any language depends on how different the vocabulary is. So I can't imagine, and also the writing system, but if a Japanese person is trying to learn English, Russian, Portuguese, it should be about the same. I don't see it as different. And similarly, an English speaker learning Japanese, because there's hardly any common vocabulary, the writing system is different. It's going to be difficult, but it'll be difficult for a speaker of any other language as well. Right off the bat, I can't think of any reason why that particular combination would make it difficult. I think it's more a matter of there's very little common vocabulary. At least if a Japanese person goes to learn Chinese, a lot of the vocabulary is already recognizable, at least in written form. Right. The vocabulary and the writing system are different, but it's not just between Japanese and English. It's between any languages, two languages where the writing system is different and there's very little common vocabulary.
I actually understand that as a good thing because a lot of my fellow English speakers were discouraged to study Japanese because they saw the study. Yeah, so I think that's
Yeah.
actually a good thing if you say it that way.
I mean, to me, the inherent difficulty of any language, I mean, there is if you are a speaker of English, you've never learned any other language, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, all these languages with very little common vocabulary and a different writing system are going to be very difficult. So, but it all comes down to motivation. If you're not motivated to learn a language, it doesn't matter how easy it is. So the big thing is motivation, not the inherent difficulty.
So then, the motivation part, I'd like to dig in a little bit more. What would be the advice you would give to people who are studying Japanese right now? What kind of hints, for example, your own experience or the people you see today studying Japanese, what kind of advice would you give them?
I mean, obviously, I had a big advantage. I was living in Japan, so I had an opportunity to use the language every day. If I walked into a grocery store, if I, wherever I was, whatever few words of the language I had, I could use them. But if you're away from where the language is spoken, you can't find tutors all the time online, so you spend more time listening and reading. And therefore, you've got to find something that's interesting. And I, for example, was very interested in history, so I found materials, things from NHK and others that I listened to a lot. I know that a lot of young people today are into anime, for example. So if you can find something of interest so that you can maintain your interest while you listen and read. But it requires a lot of listening and reading. The brain has to get used to the new language. It requires a lot of repeated listening and then eventually finding things that are of interest. Ultimately, to reach a very good level, you kind of have to go to the country where the language is spoken. But if you arrive with a poor level, it's going to be difficult for you to take advantage of being there, and you may kind of fall back to living in English. Whereas if you can build yourself up to where you have some skills in the language, some comprehension, then when you get to Japan, you can actually take advantage and you'll see your language skills improve quite quickly.
When you're, for example, listening to, for example, an NHK or it could be a movie or anything, do you shadow the language or do you just listen to it when you study?
No, I never shadow. I've tried it. It just interferes. I want to listen. If I'm listening to something of interest or if I'm watching a movie, I don't want to do anything that interferes with my enjoyment. I just watch and listen. So I'm not a big shadower, no. But it's a good thing to do, particularly with easy content.
All right, so the enjoying part is definitely important.
Big. Keeps you going.
And by the way, do you think there are some common mistakes that Japanese learners tend to make when they study Japanese?
I think people shouldn't be overly concerned about, keigo or polite language, because no Japanese person is going to be offended unless you are speaking very rough language. But if you speak sort of a neutral Japanese and you don't hit the absolute correct keigo, no Japanese person is going to be offended. And I think sometimes that builds up sort of an obstacle. Gee, all this polite language, what if I get it wrong? I might offend someone. You won't offend anyone. I think the strategy there is to speak somewhat neutral Japanese. Don't speak sort of a rough Japanese. And gradually you'll start to get a sense of the different levels of politeness, because you'll be with people and you'll see how people around you are using the language.
Then I was a little bit curious about this question too, though, but anime Japanese could be a little bit different from what we actually speak in daily life.
Right.
So what kind of content would you recommend to listen to study the language itself?
When I was in Japan, my content was my business meetings with people. So that was my listening content. If I had a business meeting, I spoke some, other people spoke. That was my listening content, right? Plus this one series by NHK called Shou no Kiroku, which I loved listening to. And I listened to the radio. But the biggest was when I'd be meeting. I can remember, for example, I was in the lumber business going down to the Tokyo terminal, and if the traffic was bad, we'd be sitting there for 2 hours, and I'd just be talking for 2 hours. And mostly I'd be listening. And so then you start to get the rhythm of how people express themselves and the words they use. And so you start using those words. I'm not into anime. I think in any language, you want to be careful about picking up on slangy language, because if you don't use it correctly, it can sound strange. Whereas if you speak a more neutral form of the language, such as the English we're now using, you're not going to sound strange. It's not slangy, it's not overly polite, it's just neutral. And that was the kind of Japanese that I like to use, that I picked up on when I was with people. And even if, sometimes people speak more roughly, I wouldn't use that rough language.
So then, do you recommend those applications that are recently quite used for learning languages? I think a lot of Japanese learners who give me DMs asking me how to study Japanese, ask me about applications, if they work or not. So what would your opinion about them?
Well, the only thing I use is Link. I have it on my cell phone. I can read, save words. I can go through my vocabulary. I can do flashcards. So I just use Link. That's the only one I use. I know that when my son went to learn Japanese characters, he used Heisig. So I think for learning the characters, I think some of these systems for learning characters can be good. Ultimately, it boils down to just a lot of listening and reading and things of interest. So that's what I do.
But I guess for people then who can't come to Japan to actually have conversations with Japanese people, the best way would be your recommendations for them?
Well, I mean, it's what I say at my YouTube channel. Lots of listening and reading, working on building up your vocabulary and your comprehension. At some point, you want to start speaking. You can find tutors online, twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever your budget is. Yeah, that's basically what I do. Listen and read, use Link. That's what I've done for the last, 7, 8, 9 languages. Even when I was learning Mandarin or Japanese, overwhelmingly it was listening and reading. So if I were to rely just on going to a store and asking a question, that's not a lot of high value exchange. I had the advantage that I was in business in Japan. I had customers. We would meet. We'd have a business meeting in Japanese. We may go out for dinner in Japanese. So I was like with Japanese people for 2, 3, 4 hours. So you pick up a lot that way. You pick up a lot. You pick up on how people express themselves, which is the language and also how they put their thoughts together. And all of that you get from spending a lot of time with people.
Then a little bit different question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
You can speak a lot of languages, right? More than 20, I believe? Is that correct?
Well, varying degrees, yeah.
So what do you think were the benefits for you to be able to speak Japanese? Like for example, for me, being able to speak English, Mandarin, Chinese really did open up my world to a lot of different values around the world and such. What do you think have changed ever since you've been able to use Japanese?
The big thing is that from a career point of view, it was extremely important. Because I spoke Japanese, working at the embassy, I developed contacts within the Japanese wood trade. As a result of that, I was offered a job. I set up a company of my own in 1987 targeting the Japanese market because I knew people there. And because of my language, I could read the newspaper. I read the trade paper. I knew what was going on. I talked to people. I could pick up the phone and talk to people. What's happening in the market, whatever. So from a business point of view, it was tremendously powerful. If I had to rely just on those Japanese people who spoke English, I wouldn't have the same access. But beyond that, when you speak the language of a country, you have a different understanding of the country, of the people, of the culture. You get closer to it. You become part of it. Whereas if you just rely again on English, then you're kind of apart from it. So that was a tremendous personal benefit. And one that I always enjoy. If I go to a Japanese restaurant in Vancouver and the server is Japanese or the chef is Japanese and I can engage with them, and I kind of remember with pleasant nostalgia, when I lived in Japan. So there's a lot of benefit there, sort of a personal enjoyment, personal interaction, social, cultural, all those things.
So earlier, the question about the benefits of learning Japanese, someone actually asked me, is it really worth it? It's just so much hard work, and the question was, is it really worth studying such a difficult language for them, especially for English speakers?
If you are studying a language, you better believe it's worth it, because it's a lot of work.
That's right.
It doesn't matter whether it's Spanish, if we're talking from the perspective of an English speaker, whether it's Spanish, Russian, Japanese, Chinese, German, doesn't matter. It's work. So you should sort of have a mindset that you're glad you're doing it. Try to find a way to enjoy it. Whether it's objectively worth it for someone depends entirely on them. What do they want to achieve? What would they rather be doing? So I can't tell you whether it's worth it. It was worth it to me. Every language I learn is worth it.
Of course, yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Steve.
Okay.
Lastly, is it
Oh,
okay
that's
if I can ask you a favor before we go?
Sure.
ぜひ日本語で今日本語を勉強してらっしゃる私の視聴者様の皆様に応援の一言をもし言っていただけたらなと思うんですけれども。
そうですね。まず日本語というのは日本の文化はね非常に豊か。私の人生大変影響を与えたわけですよ。で、非常に素晴らしい文化ですよ。どこの国の文化でも素晴らしいんですけれども、日本の文化は非常に素晴らしい。日本の勉強は難しい、時間かかるけれども、非常にやる価値がある。最初の間はね、非常に難しいと。いつまでたってもこの日本語はその流暢に話せないとかね、楽観じゃないようなね、態度がね、それを避けるべき。必ず前よりも進歩しました。前よりも良くなったと。続ければ必ずもっともっともううまく話せるだろうと。だからもう続くしかないんですよ。で、楽しく日本語を勉強するのが一番大事だと思います。
わかりました。ありがとうございます。Okay, then thank you so much for your time today, Steve.
Thank
you
you
so
very
much.
much.
ありがとうございました。Thank you
ど
so
うもありが
much.
とう。さよなら。
So that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. As I said when I was talking with Steve, it was a great occasion, an opportunity to be able to talk with him like this. And right after we stopped filming, we were speaking just a little bit more, and we were saying that it's really important that it's okay to make mistakes. It's absolutely okay to make mistakes. I think it would be the same for if someone was learning your language. If someone came up to you, desperately trying to learn your language, it would be nice to them, right? Because they respect your culture and your language. So although I do make a lot of videos talking about Japanese people are cold-hearted or, they might be xenophobic or stuff like that, I don't want you to be afraid at all. If that person is willing to help you with your language, that person respects you as much as you respect them. So I really want to add that it's completely fine. Actually, go and make the mistakes because you need to do that when you are going to be studying a language. I personally would think so. So even though Japanese is difficult, I would want to also say that it's definitely worth it. And I'm really looking forward to the day that I'll be able to speak with you in Japanese too. Okay, then everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. Our goal is to achieve 2 million subscribers by January 2023, so it'd be great if you could help us out by subscribing, also liking and leaving comments in this video. And I'll see you in our next video. Thank you so much. ありがとうございました。